Welcome you all to Swami Reacts, and today we'll be sharing some thoughts on the book Traditionalism, Religious in the Light of the Perennial Philosophy by Kenneth Oldmeadow. This is a great book. I just finished reading it. I've taken so many notes, as I do often, but with this one in particular, I was gladly surprised. This was a book recommended to me by one dear brother and friend. I assume some of you may know him, Father Cashin. He, in his recent visit here to Ananda Ashram, where I'm staying when I'm recording this, of course, we're talking about books. That's main part of many of our conversations. And he saw that I was studying some books by Mircea Eliade and related authors. And he said, Swamiji, have you ever read about traditionalism? And specifically, he went to this book by Kenneth Oldmeadow, Traditionalism. He spoke very highly of it. Also, he realistically said, I do not necessarily agree with everything on the book, but at the same time, it has impacted on me very, very deeply. And I must say, of course, nobody has the same experience, but somehow my experience with the book has been very similar. Not necessarily I agree with every single concept, but in general, wow, I've been deeply impacted by its insights, even if I don't subscribe to every point. They have been very reconfirming, very illuminating on things that I have already been thinking and talking about for years or decades. But again, every time you get a new perspective, so to say, or emphasis in certain direction with certain wording and articulation, that can open so many doors. So it has been a very rich engagement with the texts. The subtitle of the book maybe being even more clarifying, or put the title in context. The title is Traditionalism, and the subtitle, as you can see, is Religion in the Light of the Perennial Philosophy. And why I'm saying this, because for some people, traditionalism may sound too much like extreme orthodoxy, right-wing, fanatical exclusivism, where only my tradition is true. That's not the idea here with traditionalism. And on the other side, we have the notion of perennialism. So for some people, perennialism may be a vague, syncretic idea, like all differences are erased, everything is the same, everything is one. So the two put together, at least for me, helped a lot to have every one of them in context. Traditionalism being put in its place by perennialism being put in context by traditionalism. So it's trying to hold them together. Tradition and universality. Depth and breadth, if you will. One doesn't need to exclude the other. So personally, to me, this book speaks to both sides of me. The breadth side, the openness, dynamic, ever-evolving side, the progressive side, but also the orthodox, traditional, old school, perennial, eternal side, if you will. I know that maybe some people, at least I've heard that a few times, see me like dynamic or progressive. I mean, for some people, maybe too much of that. But of course, I do try to explore new ways of articulating the eternal truths, languages, frameworks, the ever-evolvingness of things. As you know, my third book is on the topic of evolution in divine love and the prospect of the eternal becoming of God, soul, and matter, and how the nature of the divine and love is one of eternal unfoldingness and evolvingness. But all that, as I also make clear in my third book, is on the foundation of changelessness, of certain eternal principles and essence that remains the same. And on that foundation, they facilitate an ever new, ever fresh experience. So again, from one side, I see myself, or as at least trying to embrace a dynamic, progressive view of life, of spirituality, of my particular tradition, Gaudiya Vaishnavism. But also underneath that, and probably many people do not relate that much to that as being part of me, I see myself as quite orthodox in the truest sense. At least that's what I hope for. Not clinging to the form, but to the essence. So trying to be quite chaste to tradition. So even when I'm trying to explore and develop some ideas, I try to always root them in original sacred revelation from our tradition. Again, trying to see how the revelation from my particular tradition also is expressed in other traditions, which for me further confirms the universality, the eternality of these foundational principles. But for me, all that is to, again, set a firm bedrock of tradition. So one thing doesn't need to be divorced from the other. So that's why I appreciate traditionalism on one side, perennialism on another side, depth and breadth. In our own tradition, we have this idea. We many times, though sometimes the term Hinduism is there to refer to what we do over here. That's not a very precise terminology, because Hinduism is vague. It's never in Shastra. It speaks about whatever is going on over there in India or those who follow the Indian way. But what's that, right? So many things are going on in India spiritually and rooted in India and beyond India. So a more precise term could be Sanātana Dharma. And Sanātana Dharma basically means that. It's like a way of speaking about traditionalism. Eternal, Sanātana Dharma, eternal religion, eternal duty, eternal truth, eternal unchanging principle through which reality and life operates, always, forever. It's not a frozen truth, that something is eternal and unchanging in certain ways. Doesn't mean that it's not something that is breathing, singing, dancing, we will say, in our aesthetic bhakti considerations. So it's one eternal truth, absolute truth. As the Bhatans say, Advaigyan Tattva, reality's non-dual consciousness, which on that foundation of unity and non-duality expresses itself in a multiplicity of forms. This the famous old adage from the Rig Veda, Ikam Sad Vipra Bahudavadanti. Truth is one, but the wise call it by many names. Different seers, the different tattva darshans, the different rishis, in their own transsubjective inner experience, they realize this same unique one truth from different angles, like a multifaceted jewel. I like to share a few quotes from this book. I've marked them. In this connection, for example, in page 60, there are some other quotes from other traditions that make the same point. For example, Cho Li says, one ancient scripture, the true doctrine has always existed in the world. St. Augustine will say, that which is called the Christian religion existed among the ancients and never did not exist from the beginning of the human race. Or going to Greece, Plotinus say, there must first be one from which the many arise. Ekobahusham, from the one many came. This one is competent to lend itself to all yet to remain one. This identify in variety. Anyhow, many quotes in this direction. So I really appreciated the spirit of the book. At the same time, of course, I try to properly integrate this idea, because they really emphasize truth one isn't changing. And I like so much, as I say, I just wrote a book on evolution and divine love of God being ever evolving in perpetual becoming. But there's no contradiction. From the foundation of this changelessness, of this oneness and unity of truth, so much variety, so much expansion can be there. In our tradition, we'll speak about that in terms of Veda Abhed, right? The paradox of difference and non-difference. Reality is unchanging, the one always the same, truth is always the same, Abhed, non-different. And on that foundation, we have Bhed, ever freshness, ever newness, diversity and variety on that foundation. So something else I wanted to mention is that this book the author centers the narrative of traditionalism, because traditionalism is a school of thought, if we want to make it. There's a particular lineage with certain main teachers who have made these points specifically clear and articulated in certain ways. So the book centers about three main, I will say, towering figures of traditionalism, and of course mentioning many other more contemporary ones. The first one is René Guénon, whose writings Interestingly, I visited his headquarters in France last year. So first of all, starts with René Guénon. I may have the book includes picture of each one of them. So why not sharing them with you as well? So here's René Guénon. So in big part, I mean, many things I don't want to be reductionistic. So much to say in this book. So I don't want to give you the idea that I'm saying it all here now. But for example, the writings of Guénon, among many things, are critiquing the loss of metaphysical insight in modernity and many other things. Another towering figure that the book is centered on is Ananda Kumar Swami, a very also interesting, powerful thinker. He knew like 27 languages, but he was expert in arts and spirituality. He bridged very interestingly Eastern symbolism, Western thought. And another third figure, and this will be arguably the main figure around which the book is revolving, is Fridtjof Swan. You have a picture of him. Perhaps the most expansive and mystical of the three. And yeah, again, his influence is felt deeply throughout the book. So the book touches upon so many themes. Now let me go through the index just for you to give you an idea. The very first chapter I really liked it is the traditionalist attitude to biography. It's very interesting what they have to say in that regard. It starts with a quote from René Guénon. He says, "In a traditional civilization, it is almost inconceivable that a man should lay claim to the possession of an idea." Like implying a real traditionalist acknowledges I'm not coming with anything new out of my own independent thing, but we are just drawing from this original source of eternal wisdom, and we can only elaborate on whatever is coming from that ever-evolving source. So the first part of the book speaks about these main three tower figures in traditionalism, then goes to definition of what's traditionalism, the transcendent unity of religions, metaphysics, theology and philosophy, symbolism and sacred art. That's a very interesting section, actually. Let me see if I can share something from there, because I've been recently, as I told you, reading from Mircea Eliade, Symbolism. So it says, for example, a symbol may generally be defined as a reality of a lower order, which participates analogically in a reality of a higher order of being. The symbol is not based on a man-made convention. It is an aspect of the ontological reality of things, and as such is independent of man's perception of it. I know that for some of you there may be some complex language here, but again, it's very worthy reading. Critique of modernism, some other topic, counterfeit spirituality. It addresses criticisms to the traditional perspective also, like Purva Paksha opposing views, phenomenology of religion, religious pluralism, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, let me share a few more quotes. We have a few more minutes. So what's this traditionalism about? For example, quoting Fridtjof Swan, it says, "To say that man is the measure of all things is meaningless unless one starts from the idea that God is the measure of man. Nothing is fully human that is not determined by the divine, and therefore centered on it. Once man makes of himself a measure, while refusing to be measured in turn, all human landmarks disappear. Once cut off from the divine, the human collapses." In other words, we are not the center of the universe. Our existence is contextualized by the existence of something bigger than ourselves. The book includes also heavy criticism, but deserved one, I will say, in many cases to not only modernity, but empiricism, just relying on your mental faculties to ascertain the ultimate nature of reality, scientism, this idea that science is the ultimate yardstick to measure and acknowledge what's out there, so to say, syncretism as well, this like mixture of all traditions in a very, so to say, sentimental way. Schwann says that about syncretism here. He says syncretism is never an affair of substance. It is an assembling of heterogeneous elements into a false unity. So you can get a glimpse of the very precise, rigorous language and words that they use to convey their ideas. And that's something that really fascinated me. Very rigorous in terms of the articulations of how to mention what is what, right? And not fall into a false unity, and to putting things together again in a shallow way, basically, but actually understanding the underlying connection and unity of everything with a proper foundation. Mhm. Of course, there are a few things that I disagree with. For example, one of the main points that some of the points that they make is that after great personalities like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, all these ancient teachers, there's no further greater revelation. That we just have to go back there, and they acknowledge, of course, Hinduism, Islam, Jewish tradition, Christianity, Buddhism, and others. But they say after they came in this recent millennia, or recent, they're not greater revelation. And of course, it's not that I feel insulted as a Gaudiya Vaishnava. What about Sri Chaitanya? But they just basically disagree with that. Although I understand what they may say, the part of this is also tied to their notion that I may, in some level, disagree with, that everything in the past was better and ideal and perfect, and with the passing of time, everything starts to become worse and degrading itself. Yes and no, I would say. Like for example, in our tradition, we speak about Kali Yuga. And we will say, okay, Kali Yuga is the last of the yugas and is the worst. And you go to the 12th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and it describes very ugly stuff going on that is already going on. But also at the end of the 12th canto, it highlights Kali Yuga like the best possible age. So there are two Kali Yugas, two parallel dimensions of it. In one way, things are getting worse and worse. But in another sense, things are getting greater and greater. There are new insights, new depth. So again, there is some nuance, in my opinion, to add to this type of expressions. What else to say? Beautiful book, very interesting. He refers to many authors that also are very dear to me. Again, Mircea Eliade, that I'm studying now, Klaus Klostermaier. I already included in my Swami Reacts my review of both books, the one of Klaus Klostermaier, very first one, Hindu and Christian Encounter in Vrindavan, and also Mircea Eliade, The Sacred and the Profane. And here's something I'm very excited about, that is that after reading the book, I felt really inspired to contact the author of the book, Kenneth Oldmeadow. So if you would like to know more about the book and about the author of the book, of course, apart from reading it, I will be having a podcast with him. I invited him to my Free Radical podcast. He has graciously agreed to join me for a conversation. So stay tuned for that one. It's going to be a rich and nuanced dialogue. And lastly, as usual, I love to hear what you think about some of the ideas we have exposed here. If you're familiar with traditionalism, perennialism, this particular book, other books related to that, what's your take on the idea of perennial truth, the unity of all traditions, but at the same time, not in a sentimental way, the coexistence of unity and diversity, tradition and evolution, can they coexist? Please share your reflections in the thread. We all look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. So thanks so much for joining, and see you very soon for our next episode of Swami Reacts.